Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. I am James Crepea, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Of course, that is where you can find all my work and all the work of all the folks at the Oregonian and Oregon Live, and as it pertains to Ducks coverage in particular. And obviously, Bill Oram was in Berkeley for the game at Cal, which we'll be going over here today on this week's edition of the podcast, and also set you up for this week's matchup at Colorado as well. Not going to be a particularly lengthy review or preview for that matter. We will chat with Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera. Want that conversation to really be the focal point of this week's edition of the podcast because, again, credit where it's due and kind of where the conversation needs to be. Colorado's obviously a program in transition. We're not going to make a whole lot about the game necessarily in the matchup because I think the outcome is kind of a foregone conclusion here with a nearly 5 touchdown point spread. But point being that there are some fascinating things worth paying attention to for Colorado in terms of long game and when you're making a hire of a new head coach, not that long removed from obviously the last head coach and that tenure and even the very short tenure of Mel Tucker before that. So it's a program that's obviously seen better days, but we'll get into more on Colorado with Brian Howell, like I say, with the Boulder Daily Camera coming up. But first comes first, and that is Oregon's 42-24 win over Cal, a game where they win by 3 scores and can absolutely, not just did walk away feeling as though they coulda, woulda, shoulda done a whole heck of a lot more. Scored a lot more points, that they left points on the field, and they did. And there's no way around it. And yet you score 42 points. They throw for 412 yards, Bo Nix. And the 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. The 1 interception, is totally irrelevant. Final play of the half. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception of consequence. 412 yards, 586 yards of total offense is the most Cal has ever allowed under Justin Wilcox. In 6 years at Cal, and one of the highest totals he's ever had against him in any capacity in a college head coach, defense coordinator, you name it. So even on a game where Oregon scores 42 and feels like it could have scored 63, if not more, it still had and produced an incredible volume of yards, of points, of first downs, of you name it, particularly through the air. And through the air and doing so by leaning on the running backs and the tight ends. And that's, to me, where as much of the credit and praise for the offense goes, obviously, to Bo Nix, because it usually ends up with the quarterback regardless. Noah Whittington had a terrific day. I thought arguably not just his biggest play, but one of the biggest plays of the entire game was his 29-yard touchdown catch. Not just because of what it did to the score and how that absolutely unequivocally sealed the game at that point, but just the manner in which, he catches the ball over the middle and just goes straight down the middle with a head full of steam and barrels into the end zone and tumbles in and takes the hits on the way. That was as kind of as good an exclamation point in a game that was not going to be competitive in the first place to really cap off a authoritative and decisive and commanding win at that point as you're going to get. And yeah, it came with a slower start. Yes, it did. Yeah. And some of that slower start was on the opening drive. All right, a little bit of credit to Cal. After that, it was just Oregon stubbing its toe over and over and over again. The times that they got stopped inside the red zone, you had a incomplete pass on 4th down inside the red zone where, frankly, Nix has to set his feet. There was a little bit of pressure, but he could have avoided it and ultimately still set his feet and connected on the throw. The throw was there to be had. And I highly doubt he would tell you otherwise. Another where the interception off of Troy Franklin's hands, ball's got to get caught. You got to call it what it is. It's in his hands, goes off his hands. It's going to happen every so often, and just because it's in traffic means that it goes off his hands into a defender. All right. Not, suboptimal, to say the least. And on that one in particular, there was also, yes, Troy is sitting in his zone, so he's, the route is correct. There's nothing incorrect or wrong about it. It's just that when you see how open the middle of the field was, that's one that if you had your druthers, you would hope that, for a quarterback and a receiver who have been so much on the same page, so great at recognizing preemptively and ahead of time what coverage may look like or what something may, open themselves up to for some big plays. That's not one where they needed a long play. They just needed to convert and, maybe even score a relatively short touchdown. And like I said, the pass was there. It just unfortunately goes off Troy's hands. But when you saw how open the middle of the field was, it just kind of further underscores, like, not only was the route that was there's a whole lot of room for that and more. So those being two of them, a third being the stop on fourth down on the run by Jordan James, where the right side of the line had opened up pretty nicely. Unfortunately, gets stopped, over the middle a little bit. So for a really successful fourth down offense to take a couple of losses on fourth down, as Dan Lanning said after the game, they probably needed that, probably needed to be humbled a little bit and see how they respond to that. And yet we're still talking about a team who put up 42 points and 586 yards of offense and had its number 2 receiver go down about 10 minutes into the game. Less, about 6 minutes into the game. And then ever so briefly before halftime, have Franklin go down with what looked like a cramp and then come back, yes, in the second half, but nevertheless. And had Seven McGee not travel, and now he's not with the program anymore. So you were down a whole bunch of weapons, and yet you still had over 400 yards passing, and running backs produce quite effectively. 4 yards carry is gonna win you some games. Not the greatest day Oregon's ever had on the ground, but 174 is still awfully good. And again, the 412 through the air, when early on the passing game was not as crisp as it normally is. And they still hit a couple of deep throws. And yes, they still had some others where they had mishaps. Yes, they did. Whether it be the misconnections that I already referenced or the drop ball that is absolutely a walk-in surefire touchdown that Chris Hudson had go off his hands. Yeah. Now, are you going to be able to get away with all those errors against a better team? No. And that's why the Ducks were upset and annoyed with themselves after the game. Because, as they say, the standard's the standard, and when you don't reach it and you don't achieve what you know full well you are capable of achieving and doing, and it's not because anybody prevented you from doing it other than yourself, yeah, you're going to be annoyed and frustrated, naturally. And when it's against inferior competition rather than better competition, it only makes it worse. But grand scheme of things, did they win? Yeah. Did they cover for those who have vested interest in that? Yes. So from all those standpoints, I think a whole lot of points of success and things to feel awfully good and optimistic about, certainly. And frankly, in a weird kind of silver lining way of looking at it, and I'm far from it's far from my usual MO, to say the least, but not to be a sunshine pumper about it, but quite honestly, I think we'll see on Saturday. Look, they still have to play Colorado, and we'll get to that game here in a second. I think there's actually something to be said for it might be better in the long run for Oregon to have had a couple of struggles and a couple of miscues and misfires in this game with Cal than if they did go out there and score 63 or 70 points. Why? Because if they were literally unstopped, unchallenged inside the red zone, if they had such a commanding lead that they could have put in the twos for the entire fourth quarter and maybe into the third, and that they played well, no less, then what are we talking about? Heading into Colorado. Then we're talking about Oregon was this unstoppable juggernaut, could do no wrong. No matter where they turned, everything was clicking on all cylinders. They are this unstoppable force right now against clearly inferior competition. And now they're going into a game against the most easily overlooked team in dead last place in virtually every single statistic, including in the one that matters most, which is win-loss, has already fired their head coach, whose quarterback is having a historically bad season in terms of completion percentage and other quarterback metrics, who, look, you got to call it what it is. The Colorado roster's been ravaged this offseason. They do not have a lot of talent on that team. If Oregon was going into that game coming off of a 63 or 70 point performance and a win by 40 some odd points, not to say that they would look past and therefore be susceptible for an upset at Colorado. It would take far more than that. But that going into that kind of a game, it would be easy to become lackadaisical. When you have a game where you feel like you could have done so many things better and did nothing but beat yourself in some instances that really mattered, I think that helps could help better focus a team into a game where focus might otherwise be a challenge. And you still have to remember with this team, top 10 in the rankings, reeled off 7 straight wins, dominant looking offense with all this production. Still got to remember that outside of the offensive line and quarterback on offense and a couple of spots along the defensive line, this is not a veteran team. It's veteran at certain positions. It is not a veteran team. This is still a younger roster. So if they were coming off of just absolutely beating the brakes off of Cal to the point of what could we possibly nitpick or point out as areas to improve, then I think heading into a game like Colorado, where there is literally nothing that can be said to point out anywhere that this game should be competitive, you're still talking about young people and they're people. They're gonna look at the challenge. You wanted to respect the challenge at the same level? Stop. You got to be fair. Not to say that you wanted to, you're going to accept them to go goof off, but you got to be realistic. Well, like I say, in a weird silver lining sort of way, I do think having a game where, by way of performance, there's plenty of areas that can be pointed at and say, we could do that a whole heck of a lot better, and that's entirely on us. Well, that's something you can say inside the program to go do. Again, whether they do or not, we'll see on Saturday, but it doesn't mean one thing to me one way or the other, but I do think that is something internally that could help in that perspective. Now, having said all that to set us up for this Colorado game, I say I'm not going to get into some long-winded preview here, and again, we'll chat with Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera to get into the preview more than I can do it justice. But the bottom line is this game absolutely should not be competitive. So I'm not going to sell it as though it should be or it will be. It shouldn't. It shouldn't. Oregon is the vastly superior and better team from pillar to post, from every position, up and down the roster. Colorado's roster wasn't good in the first place. It got ravaged in the offseason, lost over 20 guys to the portal, 6 of them starters, Christian Gonzalez being one of them. It has done an absolute number on that team. Having said that, they still managed to beat Cal. They could end up having a 1-11 season, but at least they got the 1. And their non-conference schedule, which was not going to be easy no matter what, I think is going to stand the test of time, is actually, bizarrely enough, one of the tougher non-conference schedules in the entire conference. But what are you going to do? They have to improve everywhere. We get all that. And we'll chat with Brian about that, about, where do they look for a head coach? What do they need to do? All those sorts of things. But for the here and now for this weekend, Oregon defining success in a game where they're favored by 4 scores and nearly 5 touchdowns. And by the time we get to Saturday, it might very well be 5 touchdowns. On the road, no less. In a place where they haven't been in quite a while. I don't think anybody on the team, on the active roster, has actually been there other than Christian Gonzalez, who played there. There may be 1 or 2 others, but very few. They're going to win, and they're going to win handily. But it's, how do you define success in upholding the standard, in achieving statistical successes in certain areas, that they need to show it? When the passing game is going to be out there and they're going to be lobbing the ball with the starters, how do they connect, and what does that look like? Particularly if Chase Code is unable to go this weekend. If he's unable to go this weekend. What does that look like? How do you foster depth at the receiver position where it wasn't the deepest group in the first place and it got thinner after this past weekend, and it may be thinner this next weekend? So what does that look like defensively? Whether it be third down, which was actually pretty good this past week, or overall run defense being better, pass defense, particularly in a couple of deep throws. They didn't get beat all over the place against Cal, but there were a couple of deep throws, including against Gonzalez. So are there a couple of instances where Colorado's probably going to lob a couple of deep throws? They're going to have to. All right, well, how do you go about defending them? Your Oregon's corners are better than Colorado's receivers. There's no case to be made to the contrary. Well, got to go out and prove it every play. They do those things and put forth a absolutely 60-minute shellacking. And now that we're getting into playoff committee ranking time, where style points and strength of schedule and every which one of these metrics and game control and all that stuff matters. Yeah. If you're a Ducks fan, you want this to be as lopsided and ugly as possible. You want this to be a 63 or 70 point offensive output with no more than 21 points allowed on defense. That's your dream scenario if you're an Oregon fan for Saturday. Combined with obviously everybody being healthy and that way the Ducks are in a optimal position from a roster standpoint entering their final 3 games against, what is going to be and should be 3 really good games, as November continues. But again, we'll talk about those in the weeks ahead. For now, we will chat with Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera, get his perspective on the Buffaloes, and obviously, again, a program very much amidst great upheaval and transition and change. But having said that, a still proud program that does have fan support and fans who, frankly, deserve better than what they've been seeing on the field for a while, but probably not going to be changing on Saturday for them. And we'll probably have a pretty good showing of Oregon fans in the crowd as well. But we'll chat with Brian Howell, get his perspective on Colorado for this week, as well as for the big picture of where the Buffs may be headed next. And we welcome to this week's edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast, the Colorado beat reporter for the Boulder Daily Camera, Brian Howell, who you can follow on Twitter at Brian Howell33. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for fitting us in, as always. Well, Brian, we certainly, many of the people know at this point, many of the fan, even the casual fan knows that Colorado is having a rough year, got off to a brutal start. The schedule was not going to be easy from the jump, and obviously made a coaching change with Carl Durrell. In the big picture sense, at this point, now under interim coach Mike Stanford, and how this team has been performing. I realize coming off a loss to Arizona State, but we're not necessarily judging and assessing success and failure strictly by the win-loss column with this team and this program right now. In the big picture, where do things stand? Understanding, again, neither one of us are going to make this out to be that Oregon-Colorado is supposed to be a competitive game.
Right.
That's understood. But where does the Colorado program find itself entering this game, knowing that it's the last place team going up against the first place team, and they are not supposed to be in a competitive game?
Yeah, it's a situation where, as we all know, Arizona State's not having a great season either. They fired their head coach. They had a quarterback competition a week ago because things were so bad the week earlier at Stanford, yet still came into Boulder as 14-point favorite. And, CU was actually obviously they're disappointed they lost the game, and they could have won it with some different things going on in the game. But, they're pleased in some regard in that they put up a season high in points, and they were competitive in the fourth quarter and rallied and all that stuff. And so they're at the point that they actually don't feel too bad about a home loss against one of the other worst teams in the Pac-12 South. So that's where they are at this point. That it's amazing. I don't think I've ever written about more moral victories after a loss than I did on Saturday night.
I was going to say, watch a little bit of the post game with Sanford. It really, I don't even need to watch ASU. Well, again, also as an interim head coach, but mainly since Oregon's not playing ASU, I just don't care. I don't have to, because what does it make a difference? But I mean, the tone and tenor of the postgame with Colorado, like you say, after a loss where they gave up 42 points and allowed an Arizona State team with an interim coach, with a quarterback competition that week, to throw for the most yards it had thrown for in like 4 or 5 years, and to still walk out and like you would have thought they won the game. I mean, the tone and tenor of that postgame was just like, I went, oh my goodness, like that's really, where things find themselves. But I mean, at the same time, if you want to be a Debbie Downer every day because of the state of affairs, you're going to be pretty miserable for 3 solid months. So I understand that too.
And I'll put it this way. I mean, and Mike Sanford made this point to us. He talks to us on Sunday nights, and he made this point, and he's right in that it's now 3 games since he took over, and in 2 of the 3, they actually had a legitimate shot to win the game, and they won 1 of them. In the 5 games before he took over, there was no shot. I mean, there was the TCU game to start things off. Actually, ironically, TCU, who's now one of the better teams in the country, that was probably their best shot to win in the first 5 weeks. I mean, that was go back and look. That was a competitive football game until late in the third quarter, and TCU, took ran away at that point. But 2 of the last 3 weeks, the Buffs could have won, and I wouldn't say should have, but they could have won on Saturday night to go 2-1 under Sanford. Obviously, they're 1-2, but I guess that's where things stand. Is that they're playing better football, and there's this excitement, and there's the words joy and fun and all that stuff have been big words under Stanford, and it sounds kind of like orange slices, things like that, but that's what he's done, is he's brought some excitement back to the program, even though they're not winning.
And again, credit to the Colorado fan base who has shown up nicely still. I mean, there are fan bases out there who have teams worth cheering for who don't show up. This is a team and a program who obviously, this is going to bottom out by way of the season. There's no way around it. And their November stretch is absolutely brutal. Starting with Oregon on Saturday, then, at USC, at Washington, and playing Utah at the end. Needless to say, Colorado's going to be a dog and a big dog in all 4 of those games. So this could very well be a 1-11 season. And they're still showing up. They got 40,000 people there this past weekend. I'm sure there'll be a significant crowd on Saturday for Oregon. There were 50,000 people, listed attendance for the Cal game, and of course they win that one. I mean, this is a fan base. These are people who are proud and they want to support a winning program, and they know they're not going to be doing it right now, but they're still supporting it. And what did that Cal win? And all right, yes, this one, this past one was close, even though they gave up a whole bunch of passing yards and stuff. But the fact that they are in a different space, that if this was the same result, but Carl Durrell was the coach, there would still be this dark cloud hanging over in terms of what the future is. It's understood that the future is going to be changing, but what has the coaching change mid-season actually meant to changing a bit of the temperament and mood around things at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of goes back to what I was saying about fun and joy and all that stuff. And Mike Sanford has mentioned several times they've tried to build this culture of joy, and it does sound kind of hokey, but that's what they've done. And there was none of that under Carl Durrell. And I like Carl, but it just wasn't there. I mean, he's not an outgoing person. People didn't get to know him, even on his own staff, and even within the athletic department, people didn't really know him that well. So Mike Sanford is the complete opposite of that, and has gone out of his way. So I think what it's done is the fan base knows that Mike Sanford's not going to be the head coach here. I mean, he was going to have to probably go 4-3 in these 7 games, something like that, to have a shot. He's 1-2, and he's not going to win the next 4. So you can't hire a guy that goes 1-6 down the stretch. So he's not going to be the guy. But I think what it's done is it's brought some excitement back, and to where the fans know this is changing. So let's at least go out here these last couple of months or 6 weeks, whatever it is, and at least cheer on the guys and watch some football. So, and you're right, people will be here for Oregon because they always show up for Oregon. The last home game is Utah, and I mean, it's a neighboring state. There's a ton of Utah fans around here. They're going to show up for that game as well. There might be a lot of green and a lot of red in the stands those 2 days, but there's still going to be a lot of people here, and that creates a good atmosphere.
For fans who are going to be getting their first dose of Colorado from this Ducks fan base in particular, Brian, give folks an idea at the quarterback position, where I realize Colorado's kind of gone back and forth, but it sounds like from listening to press conferences and reading your work that this is JT Shroud's show for the time being, and that McNown could end up redshirting, and I think that's kind of part of the plan at this point. So in that case, it's going to be Shroud on Saturday, and statistically speaking, he is having a absolutely brutal year, even if this past weekend was not as dreadful other than the completion percentage. What should Oregon fans expect from a JT Shrout passing game, particularly if Fontenot is back in the backfield when he wasn't this past weekend?
Yeah, it probably will be Shrout. Sanford has not said whether Owen McCown is going to redshirt. It sounds like he will. I mean, he said there's a lot of conversations going on, and frankly, there's no reason to play him the rest of the way. I mean, he's been banged up. There was no plans to play him at the start of the season anyway because they thought they could ride with Brendan Lewis and JT Shrout. Owen McCown's about 170 pounds, and he's 6'2", listed generously at 6'2". He's not that tall, but 170 pounds. He looks like he's in high school, and he's the better quarterback, but he took a pounding and came out of that Cal game, and JT Shrout finished the game. And at this point, he's played 4 games. He could sit out the rest of the year in redshirt, and with no bowl game possibility at this point, there's literally no reason for him to play other than just go out and get beat up by 4 of the best teams in the conference. And I don't think that's going to happen. So with JT Shrout, yes, the completion percentage is absolutely brutal, and it's around 43%, which is, I mean, that under 55 these days in college football is not a very good percentage. Now, this is on pace to be. I'm a stats guy, James, so bear with me.
It's historically bad. I mean, there's no sugarcoating this. It would be historically bad. Yes,
I'll tell you, it's on pace to be CU's worst completion percentage by anybody that's thrown 50 passes or more since Sal and Nessie in 1988, and they were an option team back then. So that was an option quarterback that threw 41%. That's fine for an option quarterback, right? So especially back in those days. So it's on pace to be the worst since then. It's pretty bad. And his percentage actually went down the other day, going 13 for 34. But when you're asking what to expect, the thing is, Mike Sanford mentioned it to us the other day. He said, yes, the percentage was bad, but you look at those 13 that he completed, and there's some wow throws in there. And that's the type of thing that we saw in a limited amount of practices that we could see over the last couple of years. Is we see that arm, we'd say, wow, that kid can make some NFL throws. And he can, but he's just not accurate all the time. And he will make those throws, get him on the run, and that's when he's at his best. And he runs quickly. He gets out of the pocket quickly. But he had some throws the other day you watch and say, wow, that guy can throw the ball. But then he has some throws you're like, what are you doing? And that's just kind of where they're at right now, is that there's no consistency. And I mean, Colorado hasn't had a 300-yard passer since Steven Montez graduated after the 2019 season, and hasn't even really been close. So I can't imagine that the passing game is going to be a super big threat on Saturday against Oregon.
Tell us a little bit from the couple of receivers to pay attention to, though, because it's understood that with Fontenot, and again, fans understand that if Fontenot's back, then okay, then they're going to lean there. And even if he's not, that they're still going to lean on Smith then in the running game. So, you do that as long as you can, and if you get down, then all right, you're stuck passing. What are you going to do? But this is a receiving core that, I mean, you just got to be honest. Outside of Colorado fans, I don't think very many fans in this conference really remember anybody. Maybe RJ Sneed, maybe, but some of it because of youth, some of it because of transfer, some of it just because of just the way things have shaken out. This is not the most household name receiving core. So whether it's Jordan Tyson or Daniel Arias, who should fans be at least mindful of in terms of who will be drawing Christian Gonzalez's attention in his reuniting with his former team?
Yeah, it's going to be Jordan Tyson, and Christian. I don't know if he knows Jordan because Jordan's a true freshman, but that kid, not a household name yet. But I mean, this week was named the Pac-12 Special Teams and Freshman of the Week, CU's first 2 awards of the season, and they're both the same kid. But had a phenomenal game the other day. That kid's going to be a star, and if it's going to be at Colorado, we're going to find out, I guess, this winter. But that kid's really good. And we started hearing his name in the summer before our preseason camp even started. And he wasn't, one of the highest recruited guys in this class. It was kind of like, really? That kid's turning heads? And so then you get into fall camp, it's like, oh, they keep saying his name. And it's taken a little while, but now he's taken over as that number 1 guy. And, Daniel Arias leads them in catches, but he's had so many drop issues that they actually benched him on Saturday. He didn't play on offense. He played strictly special teams. He had started every game up to that point, was leading them in receiving, and didn't play. I don't believe he played a single offensive snap. And so I'm not sure if he will play on offense or not, but it's really Jordan Tyson, Montana Lamonius Craig, who's made some great plays. He had the winning catch against Cal. And then R.J. Sneed is a guy that, from Baylor that has dealt with a foot injury most of the season, but is starting to get back a little bit. And his numbers aren't great, but, he's a guy that, could, make some plays. So I think it's those three guys.
On the other side of the ball, Brian, only main guy I'll ask you about is Josh Chandler-Samito, the inside linebacker, who's just really all over the field and racking up tackles for Colorado. And I mean, somebody has to. And he's not the only one with tackles, but he's got 66. And the main numbers that jump out are the 10.5 for loss, with a couple of sacks, and he's providing the production. And this is a transfer from West Virginia, who comes in as a grad transfer. And I realize, like in years past, we would talk about Nate Landman, and whether he was hurt or not, and just the sheer tackle machine that he was. So someone in this defense is going to have a whole bunch of tackles. One, how and why has Josh Chandler-Samito been this productive, particularly in a TFL standpoint? And two, to his story, what did he say even before the season got going in terms of truly why he chose Colorado? Because he only had 1 year to go, and this was not exactly a state secret that this was not going to be a very good season for them no matter what happened. So I'm sure there were other suitors. This is a guy who played at West Virginia and had like 110 tackles a year ago. So this isn't a guy who's just, he's buried on the bench and he's going off somewhere just to play to the maximum. He was already playing a pretty big role. So, how has he been able to rack up 10.5 tackles for loss at Colorado, and why did he choose Colorado in the first place?
Yeah, not only a big role, he was West Virginia's leading tackler last year, and I don't know exactly what honors they were, but he received all Big 12 honors at different points in his career. So yes, this was a very good linebacker, and when I've asked him about it, he hasn't talked about like what other offers he had, but clearly there wasn't a whole lot for him to choose Colorado, but he says he just wanted something totally different. And it's an odd choice in a lot of ways in that he became a father in March, and his daughter, he's from Ohio, and that's where his daughter lives. And so for him to go from his daughter's in Ohio, he was out in West Virginia, and he comes all the way out to Colorado. It's kind of an odd thing for 1 year to come out and do that. But, he loved it here in Colorado. He connected with the coaches, and that tells me he probably didn't have a whole lot of Power 5 options, which is surprising, but he's been great for this defense. And, Nate Landman's the best linebacker I've covered at Colorado. Josh Chandler-Samito might be the number 2 on that list. He's been really good. His tackle numbers are legit, and he's in on a lot of plays. And just the defense, the way they have it set up, is that they set things up for him to rush the passer a lot and get in the backfield, and he finds his way back there a lot. He's had, I think it's 5 or 6 straight games, he's had at least one TFL, so he's been getting back there a lot. He's their most impactful player on defense, and the other one's probably Trevor Woods, their safety, young safety, but Josh has been their best player on defense for sure.
Last thing about the game specifically, Brian, it's kind of a given by way of result here. So as we were talking with Dan Lanning here on Monday about how you define success, and he just made it simple: win, which I can appreciate. I mean, I think they probably have a few more things on the checklist, but I can appreciate that. How does Colorado define success in this one, where they're nearly 5 touchdown underdogs? It's understood. No one's trying to portray it as though these are 2 equally talented teams. They're not. We understand that. So what is it that they'll be looking for? What will they have to do to have Mike Sanford go into the post game in Boulder Saturday night and come in at least upbeat, if not necessarily chipper necessarily, but upbeat as he was a week ago after a loss to ASU?
Well, before I said it, with all due respect to Dan Lanning, who I don't know, I would not define success as winning if you win by 1 point or it's a 1-score game. And you know that. But I mean, in my opinion, you're closer to this Oregon team than I am, obviously. But in my opinion, looking at the CFP, Oregon still has to make up for that 49-3 loss to Georgia, because it keeps getting brought up. And I think they've got to make the best impression possible. And if Colorado has any shot in this game whatsoever, then that doesn't look good for Oregon. So I think that's a scary thing for Colorado, is that Oregon could be looking to run things up because they have to look good for the committee. So for Colorado, I think success is that you cover, and they've only covered. Obviously, they won the one game when they were an underdog, and then they covered this last Saturday against Arizona State, and that's it. And so, to me, if you cover and you lose this game by less than 4 touchdowns, I think that's they probably won't say a success, but I'll look at it and say, wow, that wasn't too bad. And we'll see how it looks, but I think that's probably how I define it. I mean, they've just been so bad against teams that aren't anywhere near as good as Oregon that if they can cover the spread against Oregon, I would probably say, wow, that wasn't too bad.
Who do you think are some of the candidates who could be Colorado's next head coach? What do you think they should be looking for? What are some of the traits they should be looking for? What should, basically, where should Rick George be looking to take this thing and its coaching search, which obviously has been well underway, but, a decision may not be had for 6-7 weeks.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say that he's made 2 coaching hires, and in both of them, there was nothing that came out before the final result, and I didn't have Mel Tucker on my radar at all until it came out, and he wasn't on really anybody's radar. And then same with Carl Durrell, obviously. That one didn't work out, but that, nobody thought of Carl Durrell. Both of them, so my point is they kept both of those searches very, very quiet. Rick George is going to do the same thing in this one. So it's hard to know what they want. In my opinion, I think Colorado needs someone with head coaching experience and has been a winner as a head coach. And I think that this is too important of a hire for Rick George, number one, but more importantly for Colorado, they've been obviously not good in almost 2 decades. You've got to get somebody that can just finally get some stability and turn this around. I think it's too big of a job to give to somebody that's never done it before. And one of the hot names around the Colorado program is Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator from Illinois, who played safety at CU, obviously doing a fantastic job at Illinois, but he's never been a head coach. And so I would not look at him because of that. Now, he might be a fantastic coach somewhere, but I wouldn't want to be the team that takes a chance on him if you're Colorado. So I think they need but someone with experience, a head coach. My favorite guy is a guy like Bronco Mendenhall that just got out of it last December to kind of take a break. He wants back in. He lives out in the West. He actually is doing a podcast this fall that I've enjoyed listening to. That just listening to him, he fits the profile perfectly for me for what Colorado needs, and I think that he could come in here and do a good job. The interesting one, as we're doing this, a new coach has emerged all of a sudden on the market, Brian Harsin. Obviously, it didn't go well at Auburn. We all know that. I don't think he was ever a fit there. It was kind of one of the odder fits that we've seen in recent years. I think he'd be a much better fit at Colorado, and so that name intrigues me. You've also got guys like, Tom Herman is sitting out there without a job that has won, and so I look at guys like that. If you want to go lower level, I think Troy Taylor is a really interesting name with what he's doing at Sac State. So I think the list is long, and I don't know where Rick George is looking at this point, but I look at it at guys that have been head coaches.
It will be certainly an interesting one for sure. And I think beyond any one characteristic, I think whoever is hired, what their background is by way of offense, defense, whether they were a head coach before, will speak to some of it. But I think something like where are they going to bring things in terms of recruiting? Because what is the vision? What is the vision? What is the goal? Is this to become a much more wide open offense and play a different kind of style and try and make that work in Colorado and the Colorado climate, particularly in November when, it's not necessarily that easy to play that style all the time? Is it to play and stick to the bread and butter and be running based and all that and embrace that? In which case, how do you go about recruiting the linemen to make that work? I think those sorts of things will speak to it. I think the geography of, is it going to be continued to be based on recruiting in Texas? Is it going to be based on recruiting in what's left of the Pac-10 footprint? Any number of questions certainly will come up in Colorado's decision. It is to me, it's one of the more fascinating openings because of those factors. I'm not saying it's the top opening in the league. I'm not saying it's the top opening in the country. I'm saying it's a fascinating opening because of all the myriad factors, because I think everybody can agree that Colorado should be better than what it has been for several years now, not just under Karl Dorrell, but it's all right. But what is the plan to get there, and what is the vision to get there? And I'm not sure that, honestly, I don't think Dorrell really necessarily had a great one. That anybody ever got to see, and Mel had 1 year, and you never really got. I mean, there may have been an initial groundwork, but beyond that, you really didn't know. So certainly fascinating from that standpoint. Which brings me to the last question, Brian. Having said all that, whoever it is, what's the first 2 or 3 agenda item things in order to overhaul this roster that you think they need to do? I mean, obviously it's bringing a whole bunch of talent, and they're no longer capped off at 25 initial signees, so they can go crazy in the portal, and have an incredible amount of roster churn, which I would imagine that they probably will. But what is, if the new head coach gets hired tomorrow, says, all right, Brian, come into my office, give me your thoughts. What are your 2 or 3 things that you say you got to do this, or you're in a world of hurt?
Well, the number one thing to me is, for all the faults that Karl Dorrell had, the class that he brought in this last year is actually pretty good. And you look at Jordan Tyson, and who knows what he'll look like against Oregon with all that talent. They might be able to shut him down, but just go watch the highlights from this last week. The kid is phenomenal. You've got to keep him here, and it's not just him. And there's so many true freshmen playing, and some of it's need. I get it, but Van Wells is a starting center as a true freshman. They love him. They think he's an NFL type talent. Anthony Hankerson's a running back that's, because of some injury he's played, but he looks really good. There's a lot of good young talent that are in their first or second year at Colorado. And the number one thing this coach has to do is sit down with each one of those guys and beg them, if he has to stay in Boulder, because we saw last year they lost 23 guys, but it's not the numbers that hurt. Most of those were okay attrition. It's the 6 starters that left that really hurt. Christian Gonzalez being one of them, and to me, the most impactful loss that they had. You've got to keep these guys here, and you're probably not going to keep them all, but the number one thing this coach has to do is sit down with each of those guys and keep them here, and do everything you can to keep them here. Number 2, you've got to get in the portal and find a quarterback. And I don't know whether Owen McCown's going to stay. I don't know whether they believe in Owen McCown to be ready next year or not. We'll see what the next head coach does. But they have not had a quarterback drafted since Coy Detmer in the late 90s, and have not had great quarterback play really since then. You've got to get a quarterback if you're going to do anything. And so you've got to get in the portal. Quarterback would be one of my top things, but you've got to be heavy in the transfer portal. And those 2 things I think are going to be huge for this program to get going. I still think next year's going to be a struggle, but if you want to get to a bowl game by 2024, those 2 things are important.
No question. It's going to be a massive roster overhaul. It's going to be a big undertaking for whoever the head coach is. But for so many of the positions that are open out there, whether we're talking about Colorado or Arizona State, or whether we're talking about Auburn, or we're talking about, you name it, all the jobs that have opened already, and probably a few more to come, that everybody's relative position is different and arguably better than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, because the rule changes. Because you can have a massive roster overhaul in a single offseason. Nobody could ever dream of the possibility of bringing in 40 or 50 guys in a single offseason. It was impossible. You can never do that. Now it's not only possible, it might be incredibly likely in certain places. And the scale of the rebuilds that some programs are going to have to undertake, it may be a matter of necessity in certain spots. So the scale of the rebuild is enormous, but at the same time, the scale of the flexibility is unprecedented. So it will be, again, that's why to me, I think it's a fascinating thing to follow here this offseason. Like, we start to see the foundational aspects of that being laid at Arizona, for example. But when Jed got there a year ago, he couldn't bring in 40 guys in a single offseason. They darn near did, but they couldn't quite get there. They got real close. So it will definitely be fascinating. Well, again, here's Brian Howell. Go ahead.
I will say, can I add one thing real quick?
Yeah.
I agree with you in that, for the most part, it's maybe better. I think it's scarier though, when you're at a place like Colorado that, I've used a baseball analogy. CU is kind of like the Oakland A's. You think of Moneyball, Oregon, Ohio State, Alabama, whatever. They're the Yankees. CU is like Oregon State or not Oregon State, the Oakland A's.
I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. I don't know where that came from. I don't know. You know what I mean, though, the Oakland A's. So the Oakland A's were a farm team basically for, the Yankees for a number of years, right? That's what Colorado's got to be fearful of right now is this portal opens that up to where you've got a Jordan Tyson, you've got a Trevor Woods, a Nico Reed, who's a pretty good cornerback, young guys that are playing well for you, but are they going to stick around? And so that's a hard thing for this next head coach is you've got good young talent at Colorado, but will it be here in January?
The only thing is, though, is that the G5 is in that position too. And that
correct. Yeah.
Colorado still offers the opportunity to play on the Power 5 stage that somebody who's in not just the not lower half, really the lower at least 2/3 of the group of 5 simply does not have anywhere near approaching that possibility. They just don't.
Yeah.
They just don't. So the opportunity to play on a bigger stage against better competition is still there. I'm with you in that, they have to worry that if a player gets too good, they're gonna leave and move up. Well, it works the other way too. They may lose guys on the way up potentially, but they're going to be able to poach guys for guys who are playing better at the level beneath, which is the G5, which is the Mountain West, which is Conference USA, which is what's left of the American, and the reshuffling there, and the Sun Belt, and you name it. They'll be able to shuffle through there. And especially again, with the number of openings out there, guess what? They're going to hire a coach. All these places are going to hire coaches, and some of them are going to come from the group of 5 ranks. And those are going to be programs where, just like we saw Jacob Cowing leave UTEP, who's had a nice run the past couple of years, but those are the kinds of guys who find their way into a Power 5 conference and end up leading the league in receiving the following year because they end up outperforming the position they're in, and they can move up too. And that's I think the position where Colorado can probably find some traction is, hey, we can offer you the bigger stage and an opportunity to try and prove yourself. And they can take early on at a new coach's tenure, a couple of swings on guys and play with house money a little bit and offer guys that opportunity on short term, on a 1 year, 2 year commitment kind of basis.
Right. And that's one thing Colorado's got to get better at. And I will say one thing has been talked a lot about out here is that there are some issues with the transfer portal. It's tough to get eligible at Colorado for those second and third year guys like a Jacob Cowing, because there's this progress towards degree for the NCAA.
Yeah.
Well, some of the issues are some of the standards are tougher at Colorado. They just don't accept a lot of the credits that I'm just using him as an example because we mentioned him, but Jacob Cowing, those credits could get him into Arizona, but maybe not Colorado. And so there's an issue there. And so when we've seen Colorado's transfers in the last couple of years, it's guys that are grad transfers or first year transfers. And they're typically guys that have not played yet or not played very much. I mean, one of their best transfers was Tommy Brown from Alabama, and he's been a really good right guard for them, but he didn't play at Alabama at all. Josh Chandler-Samito was a rare one that he was the leading tackler at a Power 5 team and came here. That's why you're asking about him, because it's weird, right? Why did he go to Colorado? Most of their transfers are guys that didn't play very much. And so that's what they've got to find, those guys that you're talking about that have been productive and been proven at the college level that they can, put on a bigger stage. And that's one of the biggest things that this next coach has to do is figure that out.
For sure. And like I say, it'll be a fascinating one to follow throughout the off season, but first comes Saturday afternoon, and we'll certainly check that one out in Boulder. I look forward to finally going to Folsom Field myself. I haven't been. This is one of those games that, was supposed to happen, a while ago. And then finally, they're making the trip. So, it's been a minute. Obviously a great setting for college football. So looking forward to going myself, looking forward to, a game on Saturday that outside of the, the competitive purposes of it. It should be a good setting, a fun setting. And again, for the long picture for Colorado's purposes, yes, something to pay attention to, obviously, in the weeks ahead as well. Again, he's Brian Howell of the Boulder Daily Camera. You can follow him on Twitter, as always, at Brian Howell 33. Thanks again, as always, Brian.
You bet. Thanks.